Desserts aren't just food, they are a snapshot of their era, a taste of the times that shaped them. From the Great Depression to the golden age of rock and roll, desserts have come and gone with the cultural tides. Today, we're unearthing 10 forgotten desserts that once graced American tables. These aren't just sweets, they're stories of a bygone era. But why did they disappear? Number 1, Charlotte Russe. Charlotte Russe, despite its current obscurity, was once a celebrated dessert with deep cultural significance, particularly in New York City during the early 20th century. The dessert traces its roots back to European culinary traditions, specifically to the French chef Marie-Antoine Carême, who is credited with inventing the original Charlotte in the early 1800s. The Russe edition was Carême's nod to Russian nobility, for whom the dessert was created. The American adaptation, however, diverged significantly. In the U.S., particularly in the 1930s, Charlotte Russe became a symbol of affordable elegance, reflecting a time when desserts were meant to be indulgent yet accessible. This version typically involved a cylindrical sponge cake or lady fingers arranged around a sweet cream or custard filling, often topped with a dollop of whipped cream and a cherry. During the 1930s, the dessert saw a unique surge in popularity, largely because it struck a balance between luxury and simplicity. The Great Depression forced many to cut back on extravagant ingredients, but Charlotte Russe managed to appear upscale while requiring relatively inexpensive components. New York City bakeries capitalized on this, offering it as an individual treat sold in cardboard cups, making it a convenient, portable luxury. Its accessibility meant that even during hard times, people could enjoy a taste of something sophisticated. It was not just a dessert, but an experience, often associated with special occasions or weekend treats. Charlotte Russe's influence extended beyond just being a dessert. It became a part of American cultural memory. Its simple yet elegant presentation made it a favorite at social gatherings, particularly in Jewish and Italian American communities in New York. Over time, variations of the dessert emerged, some featuring gelatin layers or flavored creams to cater to different tastes. However, as the American palate evolved and the post-war economy introduced new consumer products, preferences shifted. The 1950s brought a wave of more elaborate desserts and the rise of prepackaged convenience foods. Desserts that were once painstakingly made by hand were replaced by instant puddings and boxed cake mixes. The Charlotte Russe, with its handmade charm, slowly disappeared from mainstream dessert culture. Today it's a rare find, often seen in small bakeries that aim to revive vintage recipes. For those who grew up with it, Charlotte Russe remains a nostalgic reminder of a time when desserts were both a luxury and a comforting, homemade delight. It embodies the resilience and adaptability of American cuisine, serving as a culinary link to a bygone era. Number 2, Lane cake. Lane cake originated in the American South, specifically Alabama, where it was first created by Emma Rylander Lane in 1898. The recipe was published in her cookbook, A Few Good Things to Eat, and the cake quickly became a symbol of Southern baking. Unlike other cakes of its time, Lane cake was known for its indulgent filling, a combination of egg yolks, butter, sugar, raisins, and pecans, often soaked in bourbon or whiskey. This rich filling was layered between 3 or 4 layers of sponge cake, making it a celebratory dessert typically reserved for holidays, weddings, and family gatherings. The alcohol not only provided a deep, complex flavor, but also acted as a preservative, allowing the cake to age and develop its flavors over time. Lane cake's preparation was an involved process. It required careful attention to detail, especially when cooking the custard-like filling. In traditional Southern homes, the cake was often made several days in advance, allowing the flavors to meld, which was a testament to the patience and skill of the home bakers of the era. Its association with Southern culture was solidified by its inclusion in literature, most notably in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, where it represented Southern hospitality and tradition. However, its decline began in the mid-20th century as American society moved towards more convenience-oriented lifestyles. The meticulous and time-consuming process of making a Lane cake didn't align with the growing demand for quick and easy desserts. The 1960s and 70s brought a boom in processed foods and cake mixes, overshadowing homemade desserts that required extensive effort. Despite its decline, Lane cake remains a cherished part of Southern culinary history. In recent years, there has been a resurgence of interest in traditional Southern recipes, with Lane cake making occasional appearances in modern cookbooks and food blogs. Contemporary bakers sometimes adapt the recipe, experimenting with different types of liquor or adding new ingredients like chocolate or coconut. However, the classic version, rich, boozy, and intricately prepared, remains a nod to a time when baking was an art form, and desserts like Lane cake were a true labor of love. This cake's legacy is not just in its flavor, but in the stories and traditions it carries, serving as a reminder of the South's complex history and the ever-evolving American palate. Number 3. Rene Custard. Rene Custard was a product of the mid-20th century's fascination with health and nutrition, particularly during a time when the food industry began promoting functional foods. Rennet, an enzyme traditionally used in cheesemaking, was known for its ability to curdle milk and create a custard-like texture. Unlike traditional custards that required careful cooking of eggs and milk to avoid curdling, rennet custard could be prepared with ease. This convenience made it popular among housewives in the 1950s who were balancing family life with new societal expectations. The custard was praised for being high in protein and calcium, aligning with the era's push for wholesome, nutritious meals for growing children. Advertisements from the 1950s often depicted rennet custard as an ideal dessert for health-conscious families, marketing it as a way to ensure children receive their daily intake of milk. Companies such as Junket developed rennet custard tablets that could be dissolved in warm milk, creating a smooth dessert in minutes. The custard's appeal also lay in its versatility. It could be flavored with vanilla, chocolate, or fruit extracts, making it a staple not just for dessert, but also for snack times. Its light texture and mild sweetness made it particularly popular among parents who sought alternatives to sugary, calorie-dense sweets. However, the simplicity of rennet custard that once made it a household favorite eventually contributed to its decline. By the 1960s and 1970s, the food industry had introduced a plethora of instant desserts, like Jello puddings and instant mousses, which provided more variety in taste and texture. These new products were marketed aggressively, highlighting their convenience and modernity. In contrast, Rene Custard began to appear outdated, a relic of a more austere time. Additionally, the rise of refrigerated and frozen desserts, such as ice cream and yogurt, offered consumers an even greater range of choices, relegating rennet custard to the back shelves of supermarkets. The cultural shift toward indulgence in the post-war period meant that light, mildly flavored desserts lost their allure in favor of richer, more decadent options. By the late 20th century, rennet custard had largely disappeared from American tables. The use of Rene itself became less common as vegetarian and vegan movements questioned the use of animal-derived ingredients. This contributed to a further decline in its popularity, as consumers sought plant-based alternatives. Although no longer a mainstream dessert, Rene Custard remains a nostalgic memory for those who grew up in the 1950s, representing a time when simplicity and nutrition were paramount in family meals. Number 4, Jello Salad. Jello salads became a phenomenon in mid-20th century America, gaining prominence in the 1950s and 60s when convenience foods were rapidly entering the household kitchen. They were a product of the post-war era's fascination with technology and modernity, symbolizing a new age where processed foods promised ease and a break from traditional cooking methods. Jello, with its array of bright colors and flavors, was marketed as a versatile base for creativity. Home cooks, eager to experiment with the new culinary possibilities, began incorporating a wide range of ingredients into their Jello molds. Community cookbooks of the era featured recipes that included not just fruits and nuts, but also vegetables, cottage cheese, and even seafood, reflecting an adventurous approach to meal planning. Jello salads were particularly popular at social gatherings like church potlucks, bridge club meetings, and holiday dinners. Their ability to be prepared ahead of time made them ideal for hosts. The presentation was a crucial aspect. Intricate molds and elaborate garnishes turned the gelatin into a centerpiece. Advertisements in women's magazines and television commercials emphasized the versatility and modernity of Jello salads, positioning them as a sophisticated choice for the contemporary homemaker. The variety was vast, ranging from sweet versions with whipped cream and fruit cocktail to savory adaptations featuring olives and meats, blurring the lines between appetizer, side dish, and dessert. This flexibility made Jello salads a staple in American homes, a symbol of culinary ingenuity and domestic pride. However, by the late 1970s, the trend began to fade. The very qualities that once made Jello salads appealing, their processed nature and artificiality, started to work against them. The growing health-conscious movement of the 1970s and 80s, which emphasized natural and fresh ingredients, clashed with the artificial colors and flavors of gelatin products. The era's emerging culinary trends leaned towards whole foods and a return to more traditional cooking methods. Additionally, as global cuisines became more accessible, they introduced Americans to a wider range of fresh salads and desserts, which contrasted sharply with the molded Jello creations. Jello salad's decline also reflected changing social norms. What was once seen as a fun and novel expression of domestic creativity began to be viewed as outdated and overly kitschy. Their association with the processed food boom of the mid-20th century rendered them somewhat of a culinary relic in the eyes of newer generations, who favored more sophisticated and health-oriented dishes. Though Jello itself remains popular in its simpler forms, the elaborate Jello salad has largely become a nostalgic memory, occasionally revived in retro-themed dinners but seldom seen in modern cuisine. Number 5. Brown Betty. Brown Betty has its roots in early American cooking, where resourcefulness was key to survival. This dessert dates back to the 18th century, making it one of the oldest known desserts in American history. It was designed to make the most of what was readily available: stale bread, seasonal fruit, and basic pantry spices. Apples were often the fruit of choice, given their abundance and ability to be stored through the winter months. Unlike pies or tarts that required elaborate crusts, Brown Betty was more straightforward. It involved layering slices of apples with sweetened and spiced breadcrumbs or cracker crumbs, then baking until the fruit was tender and the crumbs were crisp. The dish was usually served with a dollop of cream, hard sauce, or a scoop of vanilla ice cream, adding to its comfort food appeal. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, Brown Betty became a fixture in American homes. It was a staple in cookbooks of the era and was often featured in household advice columns, which praised it for its simplicity and economy. Variations of the recipe included different fruits such as pears, berries, or peaches, depending on the region and season. Its enduring popularity through the Great Depression and World War II highlighted its practicality. In times when sugar and flour were rationed, the ability to use less refined ingredients and make use of leftovers made Brown Betty an ideal dessert. Families would even use brown sugar or molasses instead of white sugar, lending a rich, deep flavor to the dish. By the 1950s and 60s, American food culture began to shift toward convenience and visual appeal. Desserts like Brown Betty, with its homely, rustic appearance, began to seem outdated in comparison to the new wave of brightly colored, gelatin-based desserts and elaborately decorated cakes that dominated post-war cookbooks and advertisements. The rise of instant mixes and pre-packaged desserts offered a modern, time-saving alternative to traditional baking. As a result, the simple Brown Betty, with its roots in frugality and homestead cooking, gradually disappeared from the mainstream American dessert repertoire. Today it remains a nostalgic dish, often revived in farm-to-table and heritage cooking circles that seek to honor and preserve the culinary traditions of early America. Its layered texture and comforting flavor profile continue to be appreciated by those who seek the warmth of classic, unpretentious home baking. Number 6. Oatmeal Macaroons. Oatmeal macaroons emerged as a popular treat during times when ingredient availability was limited, particularly during World War II. With sugar and butter rationed, home bakers turned to recipes that required fewer resources. Oats, a common pantry item, became the key ingredient in these cookies. Unlike traditional coconut macaroons, which were often considered a luxury due to the use of coconut, oatmeal macaroons required only basic ingredients like oats, sugar, eggs, and a pinch of salt. This simplicity not only made them accessible, but also allowed for easy customization. Home bakers often added raisins, nuts, or spices like cinnamon to create variations, making oatmeal macaroons a versatile recipe adaptable to personal preferences and whatever was on hand. The texture of oatmeal macaroons was another aspect of their appeal. The oats provided a chewy yet slightly crisp bite, contrasting with the smoother texture of more refined cookies. They could be enjoyed as a snack or a dessert, fitting seamlessly into the everyday diet of American families. During the 1950s and early 1960s, they were a common sight at school lunches, community bake sales, and church gatherings. Their relatively healthy profile, compared to sugar-laden cakes and pastries, made them a favorite among mothers who wanted to offer their children a sweet treat without too much guilt. However, as the food landscape evolved in the 1960s and 70s, tastes began to shift. The introduction of international cuisines brought more exotic flavors and ingredients into American kitchens. Cookies and desserts that were once celebrated for their simplicity were now seen as old-fashioned. The popularity of French pastries, Italian biscotti, and other sophisticated confections began to overshadow the humble oatmeal macaroon. The growing food industry capitalized on this shift, flooding the market with pre-packaged cookies and snacks that boasted a longer shelf life and a variety of flavors. By the 1980s, the convenience of store-bought cookies such as Chips Ahoy and Oreo became the norm, making homemade cookies like oatmeal macaroons a rarity. Their fall from favor was not just due to a change in taste, but also a shift in lifestyle. Busier households preferred the ease of ready-made snacks over home-baked goods. Oatmeal macaroons now occupy a niche space, often associated with nostalgia and a return to more wholesome traditional baking practices. They have seen a small revival in recent years as part of the larger trend towards whole grains and natural ingredients in baking. However, they remain a reminder of a time when dessert was less about indulgence and more about making do with what was available, transforming simple ingredients into comforting homemade treats. Number 7. Coffee jelly. Coffee jelly first appeared in Europe in the early 20th century, with its roots likely tracing back to the experimentation with gelatin-based desserts during the Victorian era. It quickly became a symbol of modernist culinary trends, particularly in the 1930s. The dessert was a striking blend of strong coffee, sugar, and gelatin, creating a dessert that was firm yet quivering, offering an unexpected contrast of textures. It was often served in elegant glass cups or bowls, sometimes topped with a dollop of whipped cream or a drizzle of sweetened condensed milk, adding a touch of richness to its otherwise simple profile. The bitter coffee flavor paired with the subtle sweetness of the jelly created a sophisticated palate that appealed to adults looking for a refined after-dinner treat. In America, coffee jelly was introduced as part of the wave of fascination with gelatin desserts. It was seen as an innovative way to enjoy coffee in a different form, especially at a time when coffee culture was gaining momentum. Diners and upscale restaurants alike began to serve coffee jelly as a light dessert option that was less caloric than cakes or pastries, aligning with the era's inclination toward health and modernity. Its unique, somewhat exotic presentation made it a conversation starter at dinner parties, adding to its popularity. Recipes for coffee jelly appeared in cookbooks and magazines, often emphasizing its simplicity and the ease with which it could be prepared. Despite its initial success, coffee jelly's popularity began to wane by the 1950s. The post-war economic boom brought an increased desire for indulgence and comfort in food. Creamy desserts like puddings, ice cream sundaes, and custards, which offered a richer and more luxurious mouthfeel, started to overshadow lighter gelatin-based sweets. Coffee jelly, with its minimalist, somewhat austere flavor, could not compete with the lavishness of these emerging desserts. Furthermore, the rising availability of instant coffee and the preference for more convenient, ready-to-eat desserts relegated coffee jelly to the background. It was a time when the food industry was promoting ease and speed in the kitchen, and making coffee jelly, though not difficult, seemed unnecessary when compared to instant desserts. Interestingly, coffee jelly found a second life in Japan, where it was introduced in the 1960s. Japanese coffee culture embraced this dessert, and it became a staple in cafes and restaurants across the country. In Japan, coffee jelly is still popular today, often served with a mix of cream and sugar syrup, reflecting the Japanese penchant for blending Western influences with their own culinary traditions. While it has become a niche item in Western culinary circles, coffee jelly remains an example of a dessert that, though overshadowed by changing tastes, still carries a legacy of the early 20th century's exploration of new textures and flavors. Number 8. Figgy pudding. Figgy pudding, a dense and steamed dessert with a history dating back to the 16th century, was initially known as a savory dish that included meats and grains before evolving into a sweet course. The pudding's richness came from suet, beef or mutton fat, which contributed to its distinct texture, making it moist and tender. This ingredient, combined with dried figs, raisins, spices like cinnamon and nutmeg, breadcrumbs, and often a touch of brandy or rum, created a complex flavor profile. The addition of alcohol wasn't merely for taste, it also acted as a preservative, allowing the pudding to be stored for extended periods, which was essential during times when fresh ingredients were scarce, especially in the winter months. In the Victorian era, figgy pudding became synonymous with Christmas celebrations. It was a centerpiece of the holiday feast, symbolizing warmth, abundance, and a family's prosperity. It was traditionally made weeks in advance, often on Stir-Up Sunday, the last Sunday before Advent, allowing the flavors to mature and develop. The preparation process was a communal activity involving family members, each taking a turn to stir the mixture and make a wish. This ritualistic aspect gave figgy pudding a sense of tradition and nostalgia, cementing its place in holiday culture. Serving the pudding was a dramatic affair. It was often flambéed with brandy and carried to the table still flaming, which added an element of theatricality to Christmas dinners. By the early 20th century, figgy pudding had begun to fade from American tables. The labor-intensive nature of its preparation, which involved hours of steaming, contrasted sharply with the increasingly busy lifestyles of modern families. As the century progressed, American Christmases leaned toward simplicity and convenience. Newer holiday desserts like fruitcakes, which required less time and skill to prepare, or pumpkin pies, which fit better with the American palate, became more popular. Commercialization further accelerated this shift, with pre-made cakes and pies readily available in supermarkets, offering a quick and effortless alternative to the complex figgy pudding. Additionally, the use of suet became less common in American cooking. Its heavy animal fat content didn't align with the emerging health-conscious attitudes of the mid-20th century. As people sought lighter, more wholesome desserts, figgy pudding's dense, rich nature became less appealing. The dessert, though still recognized, turned into more of a cultural relic than a culinary reality. Today, figgy pudding is often referenced in carols and literature, serving as a nostalgic nod to Christmases of the past rather than a staple on modern holiday tables. It survives in a few traditionalist circles and specialty holiday shops, but largely remains a symbol of a bygone era of festive feasting and family traditions. Number 9. Chocolate Bavarian Cream. Chocolate Bavarian Cream, known for its sophisticated presentation and texture, has its origins in French cuisine, where it was often called crème bavaroise. It is a molded dessert that combines chocolate custard, gelatin, and whipped cream, resulting in a firm yet creamy consistency. The process of making it involves multiple steps. First, creating a smooth custard base with milk, egg yolks, sugar, and chocolate, then adding softened gelatin to help the mixture set. Once the custard cools, it's folded into whipped cream, which adds a light, airy quality. The mixture is then poured into a mold and chilled until set. The dessert was usually garnished with fruit, chocolate shavings, or a drizzle of liqueur to enhance its rich flavor profile. In the 1960s, Chocolate Bavarian Cream became a favorite at dinner parties and formal gatherings, often served in individual molds or slices cut from a larger mold. Its appeal lay not only in its taste, but also in its visual elegance. It was often presented in crystal dishes or on silver trays, signifying a sense of luxury and refinement. Cookbooks of the era featured it prominently, with glossy images highlighting its smooth, velvety texture. Home cooks appreciated its ability to be prepared in advance, making it convenient for entertaining. Despite its decadent flavor, the dessert was relatively light compared to the dense cakes and pies of the time, thanks to the whipped cream's airy texture. However, as the 1970s approached, culinary trends shifted towards convenience and simplicity. The elaborate steps required to make Chocolate Bavarian Cream, including the careful tempering of eggs and the precise timing of incorporating gelatin, made it labor-intensive. The rise of instant desserts like pudding mixes and gelatin desserts offered a quick alternative that did not compromise taste for speed. These instant options flooded the market, appealing to a generation that increasingly sought hassle-free solutions in the kitchen. The rise of no-bake cheesecakes, which could be made with store-bought ingredients like cream cheese and canned fruit toppings, further pushed Chocolate Bavarian Cream into obscurity. It required no gelatin handling, no tempering of eggs, and could be whipped up in a fraction of the time. Moreover, the 1980s brought a cultural shift towards indulgent, visually dramatic desserts, such as molten lava cakes and towering layer cakes, leaving the more subtle and refined Chocolate Bavarian Cream behind. Its understated elegance no longer fit the trend of bold, excessive indulgence that characterized desserts of that era. Today, Chocolate Bavarian Cream is often seen as a nostalgic nod to mid-20th century dining, a relic of a time when desserts were both an art form and a statement of culinary skill. It still makes occasional appearances in fine dining and retro-themed menus, where its classic preparation is appreciated by connoisseurs of traditional European desserts. Number 10. Tapioca pudding. Tapioca pudding originated from the cassava root, introduced to America in the 19th century. By the early 20th century, it was considered an exotic ingredient. This pudding became widely popular in American households, especially during the 1930s and 1940s, due to its affordability and ease of preparation. It was often featured in school cafeterias and home kitchens, offering a texture that differed from other common desserts of the time. During the mid-20th century, it was often made by cooking tapioca pearls with milk and sugar, then adding eggs for a custard-like consistency. Unlike other puddings, tapioca required careful attention during cooking to prevent scorching and ensure the pearls remained tender but not mushy. The unique texture of tapioca pudding was its defining feature. The small, translucent pearls provided a subtle contrast to the creamy base, offering a slightly chewy sensation that distinguished it from smooth custard desserts. Its comforting nature made it a frequent choice for those looking for a soothing, warm dessert, particularly during the colder months. It was versatile enough to be served either warm or chilled, and it was sometimes enhanced with vanilla, nutmeg, or a dash of cinnamon for added depth of flavor. During the height of its popularity, companies like Minute Tapioca produced recipe booklets that encouraged its use in both desserts and savory dishes, marketing it as a versatile pantry staple. However, by the 1970s, this once beloved dessert faced competition from the increasing availability of instant and prepackaged sweets. These new products offered a more uniform texture and quicker preparation, fitting the era's growing demand for convenience. Additionally, the emerging global food trends brought more sophisticated flavors to the American dessert table, and tapioca pudding, with its quaint and somewhat humble appeal, began to seem outdated. Despite fading from mainstream menus, tapioca pudding has never entirely disappeared. It occasionally reappears in the culinary world, particularly in restaurants that focus on traditional or comfort foods. It has also retained a presence in certain cultural and regional cuisines where traditional recipes are valued. The dessert's charm lies in its ability to evoke nostalgia, offering a reminder of a simpler culinary era when the texture was as important as flavor. It stands as a testament to the changing preferences and innovations in the dessert landscape over the decades.